So the game is called The Broken Empires, role-playing game, and the blurb underneath the title is Dramatic Fantasy Sim-Lite Role-Playing Game. So what does that mean? Well, those aren't just buzzwords, marketing words, anything like that. Those are words that actually do mean a great deal, and there's a reason why we have them in there. So these words actually speak a lot to my design philosophy and what I'm trying to achieve with the game, and also kind of what I value as a player, as a GM. There's a core set of principles and philosophies whenever you're designing a game, or even playing a game, really, or running a game, that you kind of keep coming back to over a career. Like I've been doing this for over 40 some years, and certain things have come out as being like, these are important. These are really crucial things. And because this game, The Broken Empires, is basically the best of 40 years of gaming, I'm looking at all the different pieces I'm putting in the games, and I'm sort of thinking about why I chose those things. And that's where dramatic fantasy sim-lite role-playing comes into. So I wanted to talk to you about what it means. So I'm super high-tech here. I've made some notes on my phone. So I want to go over these, and I want to talk about it, and I want to sort of expound upon it. So the first word in that description is dramatic. So what exactly does that mean? There's a lot of baggage with that word in gaming circles. There's a lot of people that assume when you're talking about dramatic, it means you're talking about story games, and I am absolutely not. Story games for me are a very different beast. I'd call them RPG adjacent. I mean, technically they are RPGs, but they seek to serve a slightly different audience. They seek to scratch a slightly different itch than what I'm trying to do with the game. So there's baggage with that term. So let me explain exactly what I do mean when I say dramatic in dramatic fantasy sim-lite role-playing. So all role-playing games, and in fact all drama ever made, is about a character wanting something and then making a choice to overcome the obstacle in his or her way in order to get what they want. That is the essence of all drama. You need a character that wants something, and that character makes a choice, takes an action in order to overcome the obstacles in their way, and by doing so, they arrive at the conclusion, and either they achieve what they want or they don't. But if you have a character in any drama, and I'm talking movies, TV, plays, anything, short stories, anything. If you have a character that does not actively take action, make a choice, then you don't have drama. Then you don't have a story. Because if you have only passive characters, in other words, passive characters that are sitting back waiting for the world to happen to them, those are extremely dull characters, with rare exception. So in the role-playing game, in this game, in the Broken Empires, the idea that characters must take action, they must want something, that is absolutely crucial to the game experience. You can't just sit down at this game and say, I'm just going to be a fighter and I'm just going to see what happens. I mean, you can, but you're going to quickly realize that you're not advancing, because so crucial to the core principles of this game are the ideals of take action, overcome obstacles, that the only way to advance your character in this game is by pursuing your goals. Now, that does not matter what those goals are. The goals could be something as lofty as I'm going to track down the assassin who killed my parents, or I'm going to overthrow the kingdom that invaded my homeland as a child, or it could be something as simple, I'm going to go into that dungeon and get the treasure before I get killed. Really, it's as simple as that. But if you have a character that does not want anything, you don't have a game. You really don't. So in the Broken Empires, the only way to advance your character, the only way to earn experience points, is by actively pursuing those characters' goals. And that is up to the players to figure out, and with the GM, of course, it's a partnership in that. The player characters must want something, or else there is no drama, there's no story. They must want to push on the world, and when they do, the world pushes back somewhere else. That is the cycle of drama, action and reaction. I do a thing, and it affects the world, and the world responds. This is the game. And this is all drama. And this is how you advance your character. If you want to get experience points in the Broken Empires, you have to have a character with strong wants. And you set those up at the very beginning, and also those evolve over time, right? They evolve with the story of the character. And there's ways to do that mechanically, but it's very simple. It's essentially at the end of the session, you talk with the GM and the rest of the table, and you say, did I pursue my objectives? And there's a very specific meaning in pursue your objectives in the Broken Empires. It's not just, did I do a thing? No, it specifically means, did you put something at risk by rolling dice in order to achieve what you want? Because the game is so robust in terms of its conflict arenas. Rolling dice isn't just about combat, physical combat. It is also about social interactions. It's about difficult travel. So these things all are arenas in which to explore your character's wants and desires, to roll dice, to use your skills, and to try to overcome the obstacles. That is how you get experience. It's not by killing monsters. It's not by accumulating treasure. These things are their own rewards. Killing monsters before they kill you is its own reward. Obviously, you survive to fight another day. Gaining treasure is its own reward. But only through pursuing what you want, what your specific goals are, do you gain experience. Now, that could mean kill the monster, right? It's kind of like in the game Ironsworn, how you swear a vow. I'm going to slay the beast that killed my best friend. Whatever, right? Okay, in that case, yeah, killing the monster, that's pursuing your goals. Or taking any actions, using your skills to overcome the obstacles that are in your way between you and killing that monster. Or, gaining treasure could be a goal too. I'm going to become the richest thief in the city of Ancharir. Okay, cool. Then anytime you take risks, roll dice to overcome obstacles in pursuit of that goal, you get experience points. So, dramatic, that's what it means. It means that every character, every player character, in the Broken Empires is about pursuing their goals, and that is what will create the drama of the character's story, if you will. The next thing is fantasy. Well, this is probably the easiest one. Fantasy is a genre. A lot of people have asked me, actually, is the Broken Empires good for sci-fi? Well, I mean, you could twist it into a sci-fi game, but it's fantasy. It's literally in the name. Fantasy. It still deals with people first and foremost. That is a crucial distinction about fantasy that a lot of people sometimes don't make. Any good fantasy, the best fantasy, is always about being internally consistent, right? You need the world to make sense to the reader or to the participant in this case. And there has to be a frame of reference that the players rather can grasp, or the reader if it's a book, or the viewer if it's a TV show. There has to be a frame of reference that the participants can grasp so that they know exactly what the setting is, right? So look at Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is clearly fantasy. It's very internally consistent. The rules of the world, and I'm talking about the books here specifically, the rules of the world are set. They're very similar to our own world, but there's differences. There's magic, very subtle magic. There's dragons, right? There's things like that. There's the Night King, or the White Walkers, as I believe they're called in the book. It's internally consistent, this fantasy, and there's a frame of reference. Clearly Westeros is Northern England, or rather all of England, with a bit of Spain and a bit of France. Westeros is clearly the British Isles, right? There's aspects of Scandinavia in there. And Essos is clearly kind of like the Mongols and the Eastern Steppes and things like this. And, places more quote-unquote exotic. So that frame of reference is immediate. It's not our world. It's clearly not our world, but it's close enough that we go, oh yeah, I know what this is. So in the Broken Empires, you will see that the cultures represented there are very familiar. They're not complete ripoffs. You're not going to find an actual England there with the English political system of feudalism and things like this. But there's an area, or there are areas rather in the world, like the Westlands, which, they're very familiar. They're like, oh, I think this kind of feels like England. Or Angevin. Angevin feels a lot like France, or Tikal Dundallah feels a lot like Spain at the sort of at the height of its Armada years. Frame of reference is very important for me because I want my players to immediately be able to see and feel and hear and taste and smell the world that they're in. And the best way to do that, I have found in my experience, is to give them frame of reference, right? This is like a little like ancient Egypt with some Saudi Arabia mixed in, you know, medieval Saudi Arabia. Boom. Oh, okay, I got it. It's desert. There's camels. I understand the costumes. I understand the type of weapons people use. You know, it's 1001 Nights, Arabian Nights, that kind of stuff. It's immediately understandable and recognizable. So that's what I mean by fantasy in this. It's internally consistent and there's a frame of reference. We get it. We understand, you know. A lot of people say things like Lord of the Rings, which is one of the great fantasy stories of all time. Oh, well, it's just escapism. I submit to you it is absolutely not escapism, because the best fantasy is always about the truth of the human experience. It just happens to take place in a fantastical world. But that world has to be consistent so that we can make meaningful choices as characters. That's crucial. And that world also has to be recognizable. We need to understand what the rules of physics are, obviously. Does water run backwards or uphill in this world? We need to know that in order to make meaningful choices. So The Broken Empires is a very familiar fantasy world, but there's some weird things in there. But I call those out in the book, in the setting guide of the book. And by calling them out, they get highlighted as, oh, that's unusual because it goes against the frame of reference that we're expecting. And that's kind of what helps to make it fantastical, right? It's all about meaningful choices, that your players cannot make meaningful choices in a world that they do not recognize, and that they do not recognize the laws of, the internally consistent laws of. So Sim-Lite, this is the big one, simulation light. So I've talked about this in a previous video, but every game exists on a spectrum. On one end, you've got detail of resolution. And on the other, you've got speed of resolution. So a simulationist game falls obviously closer to the detailed resolution, whereas a rules light game tends to fall closer to the speed of resolution. So my goal with the Broken Empires is to find, for me, as close to the perfect balance as possible. Now, of course, that's subjective and it's a matter of individual taste. For me, I like simulation, but not too much simulation that it bogs down the speed of play. But I need enough details that, yeah, that means we're going to have to take a little more time in order to come to a resolution of like a combat or something, right? Yeah, it's going to take a little more time. There's going to be more roles because those roles tell you things that are interesting and what I would say crucial details to understand how the fight looks and feels, as opposed to I rolled against your armor class and did 5 hit points damage, right? To me, that's very functional. That's over here in speed of resolution. Very, very functional. I'm talking about D&D. But it's boring to me. I was bored by D&D's abstractions almost immediately when I first started playing. I recognize their functionality and I recognize their importance. And I recognize how easy it is to get into that, right? But that's not my core audience with the Broken Empires. My core audience is for people who want a little more meat on the bone, who want a little more detail, and who are willing to understand that in order to get that detail, you have to sacrifice a little bit of play speed. A little bit being the key here, because, you know, you could have a game like Hardmaster, again, one of my favorite games, or a game like Mithras, a game which is a huge influence on the Broken Empires. To me, Mithras is just a little too far to the simulationist side of things, by that much. But it's enough to make me go, it feels a little cumbersome. But that's just for me. I can only design for me. Some of you are going to love where this game sits on the spectrum. Some of you are going to say, oh, that's way too many rules, rules, too crunchy. Some of you are going to say, why didn't you put more details about infected wounds in there? Which, by the way, I have. There are infected wound rules in there, or whatever, right? You're going to say, well, why don't you have stackable armor, right? I got to tell you, this is just where I'm going to land on that spectrum, and either you're going to be cool with that or not. And of course, as a GM, if you're running this game for people, of course you can house rule it. Duh, that's what we all do. But rules as written, I'm trying to find a place that, for me, pretty much hits that perfect spot. I mean, there's abstractions in every RPG. Where the abstraction falls is what defines this game as a simulation rather than a sort of rules light game. As I've said, we don't do 5 points of damage. We, puncture you in the right arm and cause you to drop your sword in pain, right? Or whatever. There is still abstraction in this game. There has to be. There's abstraction in every game. The games that have tried over the years to eliminate all abstraction are unplayable. You know, like, what was it, Phoenix Command from the old days? You know, these are games that tried to basically calculate the individual trajectory of each bullet based on wind speed and all. And no. For me, way too much. But so too little is I roll a d20. Oh, look, I beat your armor class, therefore I do up some points of damage, and there's no other effect until you're at 0. That's no bueno to me. Anyway, so there's always abstractions, including in my game, right? Certain things are going to be abstracted. Resolve is a good example of that. Resolve is a meta currency in the game, but it's based on what the character has. It's not some narrative currency. It doesn't say you as the player get to edit the scene by spending this meta currency. That's something like Fate would do. That is not done here. Resolve is a reflection of what the character can actually do. And that's an important difference to me. This is a simulationist game, but it's not a fully simulationist game. I borrow a lot of narrativist ideas from other games because I think they're really great. So I like the idea that you can spend resolve points, which is a meta currency, even though it's based on your own character's abilities and such, that you can spend those to give yourself a little leg up, you know, to increase a success level or to do a reroll, right? I have no problem with that. Hardcore simulationists, a lot of them hate that. No, the dice rule the day. What they say goes. That's not where I'm sitting with this. Anyway, so that's Sim-Lite, right? And I've talked about this before. So role-playing game, that's the last part of dramatic fantasy Sim-Lite role-playing game. Now this is very important. Both of these terms are of equal importance to me. Role-playing and game. And they're very different things, but they come together under the term role-playing game in a beautiful manner that gives us all of these wonderful experiences we've had playing RPGs over these years. Role-playing is, of course, to assume the role of a character in a fantasy world, in this case, and make decisions that the player thinks that the character would make in those circumstances. Again, this kind of comes back to the simulation, right? Like you're simulating a world. You're simulating what it would be like for this character to be in that world, and you're kind of seeing through the eyes of this character to get that experience. That's called immersion, right? One type of immersion. There's other types of immersion. But for my purposes here, I'm defining immersion as that. In this game, you know, we're trying to immerse ourselves and our characters to try and experience this world of the Broken Empires as though it was real. You know, I mean, we're not gonna LARPing. We're not doing that. We're not putting on costumes. That's the line. But yeah, we want to experience the world as though it was real. And yes, the default assumption is that this is going to be played by players who speak in the first person. And yes, maybe they put on a funny voice or an accent or whatever. There's absolutely no requirement for that at all. But yeah, the assumption is that you are playing the game and you are making decisions as honestly as possible based on what you think the character would do in that moment. You know, we say the words that our characters would say. Now, not everybody plays like this. And some people go back and forth. My own group here at home, my live group, they kind of go back and forth a lot. They'll speak in character, but then they'll pull back and kind of go to the third person stance and say, you know, Joe the Barbarian goes over here and does this thing, and then they'll jump back into first person. So it doesn't matter. You know, the only reason why I bring this up is because some of the rules, especially in social encounters, assume that the players are immersing themselves and that they are honestly trying to portray the character. And so the words that the players choose to use serve to inform the outcome of those social roles. Now, that doesn't mean at all that a charismatic player is always going to have a charismatic character at all. What it means is the player, regardless of their individual socialization or charisma or whatever, the player's choice of tactic and choice of words, doesn't matter how they say it, but it does matter what they say, that is going to inform the skill that the character must roll. So you get this blending in social conflicts. You get this blending of player choice with what specifically they say in that moment, and context is king in this moment. A blend of that and a blend of what the character's skill is. So if the player opens his mouth and says words that are very clear to everyone at the table, and most especially to the GM, as being intimidation, then guess what? That character has to make an intimidation roll. Now, if the character is no good at intimidation, they're going to fail that roll, and they're going to cost the party in that moment because you have a tolerance level. This is heavily inspired by the One Ring, although I do it slightly differently. You have a tolerance level with NPCs you're trying to convince of something, important NPCs. As soon as you fail past the tolerance level, you've lost the encounter. So if you open your mouth as a player and you say things that imply a certain tactic, you better understand the skills that the character has, because that is the skill that's going to be rolled. I know it sounds a bit authoritarian when I say it this way, but trust me, this has worked so well for us over the years. It's so awesome. It's so immersive, and players very quickly learn how to adapt to that. It's just fantastic. Some of the most tense situations I've ever run have been in games where I've used these rules, these social encounter rules, and it's fantastic. In any event, the point of all this is that anytime a character takes an action to overcome an obstacle, because remember, that's what we're doing here. Anytime they take an action to overcome an obstacle in order to get what they want, we need to know whether or not they succeeded, right? So you're playing the character, you're role-playing, but now you have to roll the dice, and that's where the game comes into it, the game mechanics. It is a blend of two. I am playing my character, and I make an impassioned speech, and even though if I am not a charismatic person or I don't know the words, I say what the character says, and I choose those words, and then the GM says, roll and inspire. Okay, now the game comes into it. Now it's about the mechanics. Does the skill work? That's going to be based on your character skill, and it's going to be based on the luck of the dice. We roll dice in these games because it's fun, and because dice represent all of the unknowns that the game system does not specifically call out. The dice represent chaos. They represent all of the things we have not taken account of, but still affect the outcome. So this creates tension. Rolling dice creates tension, and tension is fun. That's why we do it. There could be no tension or fun without characters who are pursuing things that matter to them. Again, it comes back to this. So the game in role-playing game is just as important as the role-playing. In this game, in the Broken Empires, you cannot advance your character unless you immerse yourself in that character and you pursue their goals, and you allow the dice to be rolled, and you allow the character's skills to be challenged. And you allow those characters, you force your characters to try and overcome obstacles that they need to overcome in order to achieve what they want. Everything in the game revolves around that. Everything revolves around those core principles. And this brings us, of course, to stakes, right? How do we set stakes? What is at stake in the scene? Stakes are everything. If you're in an encounter in the game, everything is about stakes. What is a stake? A stake, not something you eat with a knife and fork. The stakes I'm talking about are what are you risking things for? What are you trying to achieve? What is the obstacle? And what is the gain? What is the thing you get by overcoming that obstacle? And what are you risking? That's the stake. Either the character has to have something tangible to gain by pursuing the goal, or they have to have something tangible to lose by not pursuing the goal. And, I haven't written all of it yet, but in the GM section, I'm going to really try and hammer that home. The idea that every encounter should be about stakes, should be about the stakes of the characters, right? Not every single time, right? There's going to be random encounters and, oh my God, we got attacked by bandits and whatever. Now the stakes are just survive or whatever. That's going to be, that's not uncommon. But I'm talking about things that matter to the characters. As the GM, you have to give the characters opportunities in order to overcome them, because that's the only way they advance, right? So what you get is, in the Broken Empires, you get an open world sandbox where the players are all free to choose whatever goals they want, but it is the GM's job to throw obstacles at those goals so that the players can overcome them and achieve their goals and get better. Everything comes back to that. So, dramatic, fantasy, Sim-Lite role-playing game with the important stakes on the side and maybe a potato. These are really crucial philosophical ideas that I wanted to talk about because they really do underpin so much of my design philosophy in everything I do in the game. So I hope that was helpful. And I'd like to hear your ideas and thoughts on the stuff I've said. Leave a comment below and we'll get a discussion going. All right. Thanks, guys.